Keanu Reeves walked into the motorcycle dealership one bright morning with a simple plan in his heart. He wanted to see the place from the eyes of an ordinary person, not as a famous actor or the owner of the dealership. He dressed in a plain black jacket, faded jeans, and a cap pulled low so no one would notice him. His beard was neat, and his quiet steps did not draw attention. To everyone around him, he looked like a man who loved bikes and had come to admire them, nothing more. That was exactly what he wanted. The dealership was alive with activity. The soft sound of conversations filled the air, along with the shine of polished bikes lined up row after row. Some customers were excited, taking pictures of the powerful machines. Others were discussing prices with the staff. The place smelled of fresh tires and clean metal. Keanu's eyes moved over the showroom, admiring the details of each motorcycle. For him, bikes were not just vehicles, they were freedom, art, and passion combined. He stopped near a sleek black bike that caught his attention immediately. It was one of the latest models, designed with elegance and strength. His hand gently touched the handlebar, and he smiled under his cap. He had seen this design in its earliest sketches, had spoken with the engineers about every small feature. Yet, standing there like any other buyer, he felt proud and curious at the same time. A young salesperson walked up to him with a polite smile. "Good morning, sir." "Looking for something in particular?" the salesperson asked. Keanu returned the smile warmly. "Just browsing," he said in his calm, soft tone. His voice was not raised, not demanding. He wanted to blend in, not stand out. The salesperson nodded and gave him space but stayed nearby in case he had questions. Behind him, two men entered the dealership. Their voices were louder than everyone else's. They seemed full of energy, speaking in excited tones as they looked around. Keanu heard their footsteps and the sound of their laughter. They stood just a few steps behind him, talking about the bikes with great enthusiasm. He did not mind them at first, as customers often spoke with excitement in such places. Keanu continued to move from one bike to another, checking the details carefully. He asked the salesperson simple questions, like how often the model needed servicing or what kind of guarantee was offered. The young staff member answered with patience and respect, unaware that the customer before him was the very man who owned the dealership chain. Keanu nodded thoughtfully at each reply, appreciating the worker's sincerity. As he studied another bike, Keanu became aware of the voices behind him once again. The two customers were speaking not about the machines but about a worker across the showroom. The worker was a young man arranging helmets and cleaning the display shelves. He was focused, moving quickly to keep everything neat. Keanu noticed his effort, the way he adjusted each helmet carefully so it looked perfect. But the two customers began to laugh at him. Their voices carried easily through the showroom. "Look at him," one of them said in a mocking tone. "Does he even know what he's doing? He looks so lost." The other chuckled. "Yeah, this place is too high class for someone like him. I bet he'll mess up and get fired soon." Keanu's hand paused on the bike's seat. His heart grew heavier at their words, but he did not turn around just yet. He wanted to see if this was just careless chatter or something deeper. His eyes followed the young worker, who seemed unaware of the mockery. The boy continued working hard, wiping the shelves with quiet determination. The two men continued whispering and chuckling, sometimes louder than they realized. Their words carried a tone of arrogance, as if they believed they were above the worker. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. He had come here to experience the dealership as a simple man, but he had not expected to hear such unkindness directed at someone who was doing nothing wrong. Still, he remained calm. He turned his attention back to the salesperson and decided to move forward with a purchase. "I'd like to take this bike," he said, pointing toward the sleek black one that had caught his eye earlier. The salesperson's eyes lit up with surprise and excitement. "Really, sir? Excellent choice. Let me prepare the paperwork. As the worker hurried off to get the forms, Keanu stood silently, holding the moment close. He was not just buying a bike, he was also testing the heart of his dealership. He wanted to see how staff were treated, how customers behaved, and how respect was given or denied. While waiting, he heard the laughter again behind him. The same voices, mocking the same young worker. This time, their tone carried even more sharpness. Keanu felt the weight of the situation press on him. He had not come here looking for a confrontation, but his instincts told him this moment would change the day completely. With the bike papers now on the desk, he signed calmly, his handwriting steady. The salesperson handed him the receipt with a smile. Keanu accepted it, but his ears were still on the two men behind him. Their careless words about the young worker rang in his head. He felt his heart shift. As he held the keys to the new motorcycle, Keanu's steps slowed. The voices behind him grew clearer, and with every sentence they spoke, his decision became stronger. Something told him that before leaving, he would not stay silent. He had come as a simple man, but life had brought him face to face with a test of respect, kindness, and leadership. Keanu stood still for a moment, the bike keys resting quietly in his hand, as if the metal itself carried a message. He had just made the purchase, blending in as an ordinary customer, yet inside him was the weight of something much greater. He wanted to walk out like a regular man, take the new motorcycle, and leave unnoticed. But the voices behind him had not stopped. Their careless laughter still carried across the polished floor of the dealership, and each word reminded him why he had come in quietly in the first place, to see the reality of how people behaved when no spotlight was on them. The two men behind him continued their conversation. At first, it was about the motorcycles, how fast they were, how stylish they looked, and how each of them dreamed of riding one on the open road. But soon, their attention drifted again to the young worker arranging helmets at the far corner. His face was serious, his hands moving quickly as he tried to keep every helmet shining and placed neatly in a perfect line. He was clearly focused on his duty, trying to do his job well. One of the customers gave a sharp laugh. "Look at him pretending to be busy. He doesn't even fit in here. I'm sure he doesn't know the difference between a sports bike and a scooter." The other one smirked. "Maybe he got the job because they needed someone cheap. People like him don't belong in places like this. Just wait, he'll make a mistake soon, and they'll throw him out." Their words were not whispers anymore, they were spoken with open carelessness. A few nearby customers shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear. The young worker kept his head down, trying to focus on his task, but his shoulders stiffened. It was clear he had heard the comments, yet he did not reply. He simply continued adjusting the helmets, hoping the day would pass quietly. Keanu's calm eyes followed the boy. He admired the quiet strength it took to keep working while being mocked. It reminded him of his own early days in Hollywood, moments when people doubted him, laughed at him, or dismissed him without knowing his story. He had stood silently then, letting his work speak louder than their judgment. And now, here was another soul, younger and more fragile, standing silently under the same kind of unfairness. The salesperson returned with a friendly smile, holding the papers neatly stacked. "Sir, everything is ready. Congratulations on your new bike," he said warmly. Keanu accepted the receipt with a gentle nod. "Thank you," he replied softly. His voice was steady, but his mind was not at ease. The sound of the two men behind him still pressed into his ears, each word like a challenge waiting for an answer. As he placed the papers into his pocket, Keanu asked a few more questions about the warranty and servicing options. He listened carefully to the replies, testing how knowledgeable and respectful the staff were. The salesperson answered with patience, never once showing annoyance. Keanu was impressed, but the heavy feeling in his chest grew stronger. He could not ignore what was happening just a few steps behind him. The two men now spoke about complaining to the manager. "We should tell them this worker makes the place look bad," one said arrogantly. "People like us come here to spend thousands of dollars. We deserve proper service, not kids like him wandering around." Keanu's hand tightened slightly around the keys. He had heard enough to understand their character. These men judged not by effort, not by honesty, but by pride and false status. He took a deep breath. His plan was never to reveal himself. He had wanted this visit to remain private, just a quiet check on the dealership and its staff. But fate had placed him in this exact moment, and he knew walking away in silence would not sit right in his heart. Still, he did not act immediately. Instead, he studied the young worker once more. The boy had now finished arranging the helmets and was carefully dusting the glass shelf. His hands were quick, his movements neat. He looked like someone who took pride in the smallest detail, even if no one else noticed. Keanu admired that. He remembered when he too had done small jobs, often ignored, yet he had given them his full heart because he believed work was dignity. As he stood there in thought, a middle-aged couple walked into the showroom. They approached the same young worker and asked him about different helmet sizes. The boy straightened, smiled politely, and guided them with patience. His voice was respectful, though quiet, and his explanations were clear. The couple nodded with satisfaction, thanking him before moving on. In that moment, Keanu saw the truth: this worker was not only capable, but he also carried the right spirit. Yet, the two loud customers behind him sneered again. "See? Even when he talks, he sounds nervous. He's not fit for this job," one said. "Yeah, if this place wants to be taken seriously, they need to hire better staff." "Maybe we should talk to the manager ourselves," the other added smugly. Keanu finally understood what needed to be done. He had to act, not as a hidden customer, but as a leader who believed respect was the foundation of every business. But he also knew timing mattered. He would not lash out in anger or create unnecessary drama. He would choose the moment carefully, so his words carried meaning not only for those two men but for everyone watching. The dealership remained busy, more customers entering and examining the bikes. Some staff members hurried between desks and display areas, assisting buyers with paperwork. The environment was professional, yet beneath it all, the tension from the two mocking voices was quietly spreading. Keanu sensed that others had noticed but stayed silent, perhaps fearing conflict. He knew silence could be dangerous. It gave space for arrogance to grow, and it left the hard-working ones feeling alone. That was not the culture he wanted in his dealership. For now, he remained still, choosing patience. He walked slowly around the black motorcycle he had bought, examining its lines and build as if nothing unusual had happened. But in his heart, he was waiting. The right time to speak would come, and when it did, it would not just defend a young worker, it would remind everyone what respect truly meant. Keanu's calm face did not show the storm within him, but his mind was set. The lesson he would soon deliver would stay with everyone who witnessed it. Keanu stood near the motorcycle he had just purchased, the receipt folded neatly in his pocket and the keys warm in his hand. The shine of the polished bike reflected the bright showroom lights, but his attention was not fully on the machine anymore. His ears were caught by the voices behind him, words that grew sharper and more cutting with every sentence. The two customers had not stopped. In fact, they had grown bolder, their voices filled with arrogance as they spoke about the young worker who had been arranging helmets and cleaning shelves with quiet dedication. The worker, unaware of how deeply he was being judged, continued with his tasks. He had now moved to clean the glass counter where gloves and safety gear were displayed. His movements were steady, his focus strong. It was clear he wanted to do his job well, even if no one applauded his effort. But Keanu noticed the stiffness in his shoulders, the slight pause in his motions. The worker had heard the cruel words, even if he pretended not to. He was fighting to keep his dignity. The two customers leaned closer to each other, their whispers not really whispers anymore. "You know," one said loudly, "if I were the manager, I'd kick him out right now. He's lowering the standard of this place." The other laughed. "Exactly. This dealership is supposed to be high class. But look at him, he doesn't belong here. I bet if we say something to the management, they'll get rid of him." Those words stopped Keanu cold. He had been calm until now, choosing patience, allowing the scene to play out. But when he heard the possibility of these men trying to cost a young worker his job simply out of arrogance, his steps froze. His fingers tightened slightly around the keys. His eyes, hidden under the shade of his cap, narrowed with quiet intensity. He thought about all the people he had met in his life who worked small jobs just to survive: waiters, janitors, cashiers, assistants. People who often stood unnoticed yet kept the world moving through their hard work. He remembered his own humble days, times when he struggled to prove himself, when he had been judged unfairly. And now, here he was, listening to the same kind of judgment being thrown at someone who was simply trying to earn his living. The air in the dealership seemed to shift. Keanu's body remained still, but his mind sharpened. He could no longer remain only a silent customer. He had come in disguise, wishing for a quiet experience, but life had placed a different test before him. This was no longer about buying a bike. This was about values. He looked at the young worker again. The boy was bending slightly to wipe the lower shelves, his face determined. Though he must have felt the sting of the words, he showed discipline by not responding. Keanu respected that deeply. It was a kind of quiet courage, one that most people would never recognize. The salesperson who had helped Keanu earlier came back to check on him. "Sir, do you need help with delivery arrangements? We can prepare the bike for you right away," he said kindly. Keanu turned his head slightly, his calm eyes meeting the staff members. "Thank you," he replied softly. "Yes, I'll wait." His voice was gentle, but his heart was heavy. As the salesperson left again, the mocking voices rose once more behind him. "This place is losing quality," one of the customers said, shaking his head. "If they can't hire proper people, I don't know why we should even consider buying here." The other added, "I say we go directly to the manager. Let's make sure they know how disappointed we are. Maybe then they'll fire him." Those words hit Keanu like a sudden strike. His breath grew slower, deeper. He turned slightly, his cap still low, and for the first time, his eyes met the two men. They were laughing casually, their faces filled with false confidence. They did not recognize him at all. To them, he was just another ordinary customer standing nearby. Keanu said nothing yet, but his silence was no longer just silence. It was the silence before a storm. He felt the weight of responsibility as the owner of this dealership, as someone who believed respect was not optional but essential. He could not allow arrogance to crush the spirit of a young worker. The entire showroom seemed to sense his stillness. Customers nearby grew quieter, as if waiting for something to happen. Even the sound of a child's laughter from the far end of the shop faded into the background. The worker continued his cleaning, unaware that a storm of words was about to break. Keanu lifted his head slowly, his cap no longer hiding his face fully. His eyes, calm yet sharp, focused directly on the two men. His posture was relaxed, but there was strength in the way he stood, steady, unshaken, ready. The two men noticed his stare and smirked. One of them shrugged, as if to say, "What's your problem?" At that moment, Keanu finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the showroom with clarity. "Do you think it makes you strong to mock someone who is working hard?" The two men blinked, caught off guard. The laughter on their faces faltered for a moment. One of them replied with arrogance, "We're just telling the truth. He doesn't belong in a place like this. Customers like us deserve better." Keanu's eyes did not move away. His calm expression did not change. But inside him, the decision was already made. He would not let this pass. He had stayed silent long enough. The moment had come to step forward, not as a customer, but as the very owner of this place. The entire dealership grew still. People sensed that something important was about to unfold. The staff members glanced at each other, unsure but alert. The young worker finally looked up from his task, his eyes wide with confusion as he realized all eyes were turning toward the quiet man in the cap. Keanu's hand tightened on the bike keys once more. His next words and actions would change not just the mood of the room, but the lesson that everyone would carry with them from this day forward. The air inside the dealership felt heavy, almost as if time had slowed down. Every customer, every staff member, and even the young worker sensed that something important was about to happen. Keanu stood tall, his calm eyes fixed on the two men who had been mocking the worker all this time. His posture was relaxed, but there was quiet authority in the way he carried himself. It was the kind of strength that did not need to shout to be noticed. The two men stared back, confused at first, then irritated. They had not expected anyone to challenge their words. One of them spoke in a sharp tone. "Why are you interfering? We're just speaking the truth. This place deserves better service. People like us come here to spend serious money, and we expect respect. That kid doesn't belong here." A ripple of discomfort moved through the showroom. Some customers frowned at the arrogance of the man's words. Others lowered their eyes, not wanting to be involved. The young worker froze where he stood, his hands still holding a helmet, his face pale. He was caught between fear and hope, unsure if this stranger would really defend him. Keanu's voice broke the silence once more. It was steady, calm, and full of quiet strength. Respect is not something you buy with money. Respect is something you give to others, no matter who they are. The words carried across the room like a wave. People turned to look at him more closely. There was something familiar about his voice, about his presence, but no one dared to guess yet. The first man scoffed. "What do you know? You're just another customer like us. Don't pretend you understand how business works." A small smile touched the corner of Keanu's lips. He slowly reached up and removed his cap. The motion was simple, but the effect was powerful. His face was no longer hidden. His familiar features came into full view, the face known to millions around the world. Gasps filled the room. The salesperson who had helped him earlier almost dropped the papers he was holding. A woman near the front door covered her mouth in shock. Whispered voices spread quickly, "It's him, it's Keanu Reeves, he owns this place." The two arrogant customers froze. Their confident smiles vanished instantly. Their eyes widened, and their faces turned pale. They had been mocking an employee in front of the very owner of the dealership, one of the most respected actors in the world, a man admired for his kindness and humility. Keanu looked directly at them, his expression calm but firm. "You judged him without knowing his story? You laughed at his effort without understanding his value. This dealership does not run on arrogance. It runs on honesty, hard work, and respect. If you cannot show that respect, then perhaps this is not the place for you." The silence was absolute. The young worker's eyes filled with tears, though he blinked quickly to hold them back. He could not believe that the man standing up for him was not only a customer but the actual owner of the dealership, and a world-famous actor at that. The two men stammered, their voices weak now. We didn't mean, we were just joking," one tried to explain. Keanu shook his head gently. "Words have power. Jokes can wound. The strength of a person is not shown by how loudly they speak but by how kindly they treat others." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Customers nodded, some clapped softly, and others whispered about the lesson unfolding before their eyes. The dealership staff stood straighter, pride shining in their faces. They knew they were part of something meaningful. Keanu then turned his gaze toward the young worker. He walked over slowly, each step calm but full of purpose. Standing before him, he placed a hand gently on the worker's shoulder. "You've done your job with patience and respect, even when others mocked you. That is strength. That is dignity. And I want everyone here to know that this is exactly the kind of spirit I value in my team." The worker's lips trembled as he tried to speak. Thank you, sir," he whispered, his voice almost breaking with emotion. Keanu gave him a reassuring smile. "No need to thank me. Just keep working with the same honesty. That is enough." The two customers who had been mocking earlier shifted nervously, embarrassed beyond words. They looked at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Their arrogance had dissolved in the face of truth. Keanu faced the crowd again, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "We live in a world where people are often judged too quickly by appearance, by status, by wealth. But true value is not found in these things. True value is in kindness, humility, and hard work. That is what makes us human." The customers broke into applause. The sound filled the dealership, not as noise but as a sign of respect. People clapped for the message, for the worker, and for the man who had chosen to stand up when it mattered most. The two arrogant customers finally mumbled an apology, their faces red. "We're sorry," one said quietly. "We should not have spoken like that." Keanu nodded slightly. "Apologies matter only if you learn from them. Let this be a reminder to treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are." The atmosphere of the showroom had completely changed. What had started as a normal day of business had turned into a moment of truth, a lesson that no one would forget. Customers smiled warmly at the young worker, some even congratulating him quietly. The staff felt proud that their leader had stood up for one of their own. Keanu adjusted his jacket, placed his cap back on his head, and returned to the black motorcycle he had purchased. He ran his hand along its smooth surface once more, then turned to the salesperson. "Please make sure this young man is recognized for his hard work," he said gently. The salesperson nodded eagerly. "Of course, sir." As Keanu prepared to leave, the entire dealership felt different. It was no longer just a place to buy bikes, it had become a place where a powerful lesson had been shared. Respect and kindness had been defended in front of everyone. And it was clear that the moment would remain in their memories for years to come. The young worker stood tall now, his shoulders no longer bent. He looked at Keanu with gratitude, his heart filled with new confidence. And the rest of the staff felt inspired, reminded that they were part of a team led by someone who valued humanity above all else. Keanu Reeves had revealed himself, not through fame or wealth, but through the simple act of standing up for what was right. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone in that room what true leadership looked like. The applause inside the dealership slowly faded, but the warmth it carried remained in every corner of the showroom. Customers smiled at each other, staff members stood taller with pride, and the young worker still could not believe what had just happened. He felt like he was in a dream. Moments ago, he was silently arranging helmets, trying to hide from the harsh words of two arrogant customers. Now, the very owner of the dealership, Keanu Reeves himself, had stood by his side and defended him in front of everyone. Keanu stayed calm, as always. He was not the kind of man who enjoyed making a scene for himself. Yet, he knew this moment was important. He had not only spoken for the worker but also reminded everyone of something deeper: respect and kindness mattered more than money or status. The two arrogant customers stood quietly at the back, their heads lowered. They no longer had the courage to speak. Their earlier arrogance had melted away, leaving only guilt. They had been humbled not by anger but by the simple truth Keanu had spoken. Keanu turned his attention back to the young worker. The boy's hands still trembled slightly, and his eyes glistened with emotion. He looked as though he was searching for the right words but could not find them. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've done your work with patience and dedication," Keanu said softly. "That is something money cannot buy. Don't let anyone make you feel less for giving your best." The young man finally managed to speak. "Sir, I never imagined this. Thank you so much. I thought no one noticed me." Keanu's voice remained gentle. "People will always notice, even if they don't say it. Hard work never goes unseen. Today, everyone here has seen it." The staff and customers nodded, their faces reflecting agreement. The atmosphere in the dealership had changed. It was no longer just a business transaction space, it had become a place of shared respect and humanity. Keanu then did something no one expected. He walked back to the sleek black motorcycle he had just purchased. Everyone's eyes followed him, curious about what he would do next. He placed the keys on the seat, then turned once more to the young worker. "I bought this bike today," he said. His voice was calm but carried weight. "But I think it belongs to someone who has shown real strength, not with wealth, not with words, but with quiet dignity. And that person is you." The young worker froze, his mouth opening slightly in shock. He pointed at himself, unable to believe what he had just heard. "Me? Sir, I can't accept that. It's too much." Keanu smiled warmly. "It's not too much. It's exactly what you deserve. This is not just a bike, it's a symbol. A reminder that your work matters, that respect is earned through effort and humility. Take it, ride it with pride, and never forget this day." Gasps filled the room. Some customers clapped their hands over their mouths, while others broke into loud applause. The staff cheered softly, their faces glowing with joy. The young worker's eyes filled with tears that he could no longer hold back. He shook his head, overwhelmed, but Keanu gently took his hand and placed the keys in it. "Sometimes life gives you gifts when you least expect them," Keanu said. "This is one of those moments. Accept it, not as a gift from me, but as a recognition of your spirit." The young man's voice cracked as he whispered, "Thank you, sir. I'll never forget this. I'll work harder than ever. I promise." The applause grew louder, echoing through the dealership. Customers who had come only to look at motorcycles now felt as if they had witnessed something far greater. They had seen a lesson in humility, kindness, and true leadership. Some even took out their phones to capture the moment, not to post online for likes, but to keep as a memory of a rare scene where humanity shone brighter than wealth. The two arrogant customers who had mocked earlier now stepped forward awkwardly. Their faces were pale, their voices low. We are sorry," one of them murmured. "We shouldn't have spoken like that. It was wrong." Keanu turned his gaze toward them. His expression was calm, not angry. "Apologies matter if they come from the heart. Learn from this. Respect people not for what they have, but for who they are. If you carry that lesson forward, then today has meaning." The two men nodded quickly, ashamed but also grateful for the chance to learn. They knew they would never forget this day either. The young worker, still holding the motorcycle keys tightly, looked at Keanu as though he was looking at a hero. He could not find the words to express what he felt, but his eyes said everything: gratitude, respect, and inspiration. Keanu adjusted his jacket and picked another bike from the lineup for himself, a simple model that reflected his own nature. He did not want the spotlight, nor did he want to leave the dealership with a grand show. He wanted the moment to be about the lesson, not about him. Before leaving, he turned once more to everyone in the showroom. His voice was calm but strong, each word carrying weight. "Remember, wealth and fame do not define us. What defines us is how we treat others. Be kind. Be respectful. And never forget that the smallest act of dignity can inspire the greatest change." The customers and staff clapped once again, louder this time, their hearts touched deeply. The young worker stood straighter, his confidence renewed. He no longer felt invisible. He felt valued, respected, and proud. Keanu swung his leg over the motorcycle he had chosen for himself. The engine roared to life, its sound echoing through the dealership. People stepped aside, watching him with admiration. He gave a small nod to the crowd, then to the young worker, who clutched the keys to his new bike like a treasure. With a calm smile, Keanu guided the motorcycle toward the door. The sunlight outside bathed the showroom entrance in golden light. As he rode out, the sound of the engine faded, but the lesson he left behind remained. The dealership was not the same anymore. For everyone present, it had become a place where they had witnessed not just the sale of a motorcycle, but the power of kindness. The story would spread far beyond those walls. Customers would tell their families, staff would carry the memory, and the young worker would ride his new motorcycle with pride, forever reminded that respect is the greatest gift of all. And Keanu Reeves, with his quiet humility, had once again shown the world that true greatness is not in wealth or fame, but in the simple act of standing up for what is right.